Good afternoon, panel 4. Thank you. My name's Kiki McLean. I'm your moderator and adjunct professor for the next hour and 15 minutes. I'll be looking to my handy partner, Mr. McIntyre, to flag me when we're running low on time. I'm going to take a point of personal privilege, which is what you get to do when you're the moderator following a panel and you got something to say. So I just want to point out, there was a lot of the conversation about the future of the parties, in this case, the Democratic Party, because it's left without a head, titular or concrete. And I would suggest to you that the party is an amorphous, inanimate object. And the future of the party will be defined by those leaders who step in to fill the vacuum. So that is why we don't know where the Democratic Party is going to go yet. It may not be a chair. You may see a coalescing of governors who have the most elections at stake, who also carry the largest bench for a next presidential nominee, assume that system of power within the party and begin to lay out groundwork for who they'd like to see as chair. So we didn't talk about any names who are potential leaders of our party, but right now we have not seen that vacuum filled. And we're all of a week out from a prior election. So give it maybe till Thanksgiving to begin to see some of that. So I want to make that very clear. And I would encourage you, if you want to see where leadership in the Democratic Party is going to come from, go look at the governors. This is where they're going to be. Great. Okay. We are here to talk about the first 100 days, and that means of an administration, not post-election. They're two different sets of time, right, everybody? Yeah. We're fortunate to have members of what has clearly been the most popular panel from yesterday with us today. You guys met Elise Jordan, ace analyst, somebody who can crunch the numbers, but also marry it with the cultural and the human experience like nobody I've really ever seen. I've watched her work for a long time and benefited from it, frankly, and I'm glad she's here with us today. Robert Saldin is here. What a scholar to have with us from the University of Montana, running the Mansfield Center for Ethics and Public Affairs, and here in residence at RAI this year. So all of the things came together to allow him to join us on this panel, which is terrific. Bettina Inclan, who you met yesterday, who is an administration veteran at the highest levels as a political appointee, a leader politically in the design and understanding of the Hispanic vote. And that's not an amorphous thing. Those are human beings about those communities. Really one of the most complex communities in American politics. And I say that as a South Texan who grew up in near and about the Mexican culture, but as she points out, the Cuban, the Mexican, it's a very complex and rich political culture to deal with. And there's a guy on the end, if we're going to talk about conflict, his record has been built on managing statewide races, mayoral races where there are CEOs, fundraising consultant extraordinaire, was there at the switch and the change of finance. He also is really good at popcorn when you're watching a late night movie, because it's my husband, Joe McLean. So, and don't think that gets him any favors. If anything, it's a little harder on him. And I've told him answer short, okay? Because he's Southern and he likes to tell a story.
She also said, listen to Steve McMahon, don't say anything stupid.
I did say that. Don't make me have to apologize for your attempt. All right, so we're going to start with one general question to the panel. And I offer this as someone who served as a spokesperson for the '93 transition when a man named Vernon Jordan was our national chair of the transition for Bill Clinton, his most trusted colleague, who had experience as a civil rights leader, a corporate leader, global international business. So he was kind of a unicorn in that role. And then as the person in 2004 who was tasked with leading comms for the transition for the Kerry Edwards campaign, and at about 3 o'clock in the morning on election night, morning after the election, found myself with a pack of cigarettes at a bus stop, smoking cigarettes with one of my best friends, as I threw all of my press release and all the talking points about the new Kerry Edwards transition plan away. So I've managed to go through a transition, and I've been at an aborted transition. And I think this is a really important question, because it's the first thing that people who have to actually execute the transition think about. And that is President-elect Trump. I'm not sure what the formal protocol is on that. President Trump, you wouldn't call him Mr. President yet, again. President-elect Trump was elected by a different coalition than he won with the first time. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, how does that impact how he runs his first 100 days? What impact does that have on the first 100 days of his leadership? So, but I'm going to jump over Elise, and I'm going to ask Rob to start us off with an understanding of all that. I say all this with an understanding that President-elect Trump is en route to the White House right now to have his first meeting with President Biden. And number two, you should all understand that President-elect Trump has declined to sign the traditional GSA agreement, which would allow his campaign and transition access to the federal government and the clearances they need. He's refused to sign it, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that about why. So, Rob.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kiki. Yeah, one thing I think maybe to just that could be helpful in kind of setting the stage and maybe offering something a little bit new that we haven't had at the conference. It's always a little bit of a challenge going on one of the final panels after so many excellent points have been made over the course of 2 days. But one way I think we can maybe help understand where we are in American politics right now is to think about the position of the Trump coalition and the position of the anti-Trump coalition now relative to where it was 8 years ago for the first administration. And I'll suggest that we are in a very different place now than we were 8 years ago. And I think this is kind of easy to miss if we simply talk about this election as being kind of a normal election, right? Akin to Bill Clinton and Bob Dole or Obama and Romney or something like this. Because it fails to grapple with what I think for the anti-Trump coalition is a kind of psychological blow that this election is that is very unusual. And so while it's perfectly reasonable for folks like us, political scientists and analysts, to look at how many seats moved here, how many seats moved there, what happened with this group, what happened with that group. There is this psychological element that I think looms over all of this. And for Democrats and opponents of Trump more generally, whatever the margins may be in the House and everything else, this is something like the worst case scenario. And in some ways, it's worse than the worst case scenario because nobody thought this scenario was possible going into the election, right? Trump winning, sure, that's definitely possible, but winning easily, right? Winning the popular vote. These are not things that Trump's opponents fully grappled with. And I'm not sure there's any silver lining to that, right? Eking out a victory in Arizona over Kerry Lake, right, is just not going to bring that much comfort. So from their perspective, 2016 was a big shock, but there was a very comforting story that could be told back then, right? All these things that could be said that basically suggest Trump's win is a fluke, right? It's this damn electoral college, right, that screwed everything up. Or it's James Comey coming in at the last minute. Or they point to Hillary Clinton won the electoral college, right? And not by, or won the popular vote rather, right? And won the popular vote by a lot, right? It wasn't that close. And so if you're an opponent of Trump, you could tell yourself, well, this isn't really who we're about as Americans. This isn't what America chose. The trouble this time is there's no comforting story to tell, or at least I don't see one. You can't say it was a fluke this time. And that makes it all the more horrifying to many of our fellow citizens who, when they look at Trump, they see someone who is a man with no honor, right? The classic demagogue that Madison and Hamilton and Tocqueville and Lincoln warned us about. Someone who, in any kind of sane universe, would be headed to prison and not to another term in the White House. And so it's especially difficult this time, I think, that the American public affirmatively chose this, right? And chose it so decisively after January 6th, after everything that we know about Trump, that before you could say, well, we've known Trump from TV and whatnot, but we didn't really necessarily know everything that came along with it. Well, can't say that this time. So what that means, it seems to me, for the opposition, is that going into the first 100 days, it's far weaker, it's less organized, it's more damaged.
The Trump opposition.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
I wanna make sure
right,
people are
right.
tracking on this. He's
Democrats
talking
and the
about Trump
opponents of
opposition,
Trump.
not the whole country.
Yes, no, on the Republican side, totally different story. But 8 years ago, it was angry but engaged. And now I think it's demoralized and disillusioned. Just quickly, on the other side, on the Trump supporters, two huge things going into the transition that stand out to me. One, staffing, right? In the previous administration, you had all these people who were kind of not fully on board, right? That's not going to be a problem. right? No more Rex Tillersons, no more John Kellys. In the broader party, 8 years ago, you also had a lot of Republicans who were skeptical, right? It wasn't just Democrats who thought it was a fluke that Trump won. A lot of Republicans internalized that too. And so you had skeptics, some outright opponents, right? This time, no Paul Ryan, no John McCain, no Jeff Flake, right? No Liz Cheney, right? All these people are gone. It's a fully Trumpified party in Congress. And that's an enormous change from where we were 8 years ago. And I think puts Trump at the beginning of this second administration just in a far stronger position institutionally, but also at that kind of psychological level that is a little hard to get your hands around and that political scientists sometimes don't like grappling with, but that's really important, especially at the beginning of an administration.
So he starts out in a stronger position with this new coalition per Rob. Bettina.
Being part of the former administration and looking at this one and how it looks, I was a few things. Those that didn't see this coming, I think, were living in a bubble, not understanding the power of Trump and the power of that message. And he's going into this administration feeling, and we talked about it last time, with a mandate.
Yeah.
He's going in with a mandate feeling that this, he asserted his position, a position held by the people, and he's going in, to Robert's point, in a very different situation. The first time around, he was new to government. I've worked with governors and other people who were new to government, and it is quite a transition from going from the business side, and you can select people, you can select priorities, and you go into the government where you can't just fire people, you can't reorganize things so easily. It's quite a shift, and he didn't have this incredible, massive apparatus to just place people, and the president appoints over 10,000 positions in the administration. But this time around, they learned he's had an incredible team with him for a long time. And if anyone is on X or any other social media, you have been seeing like wildfire, all the different announcements coming out, because the one thing that he will do is he's going to hit the ground running.
He'll make a decision.
And yeah, and I think he reminds me a lot of people that I work in. I've been working in the corporate sector for a few years. Every CEO I've worked operates the same kind of way of like, they want lots of opinion. They want a debate. And then when they make a decision, they make a decision. And then you move forward with that decision. And he's now assembled a group of people that he trusts, that he can feel good about. And he has this mandate that he ran on. And he ran on the same mandate. He ran on the same agenda for every kind of demographic. And those people all knew exactly what they were getting. And they all not just voted for him, but they voted for the House, they voted for the Senate, and they voted to make sure that he had the tools necessary to move forward. And you're right, like the last time with the House, there was some battles. This time around, we'll hopefully know soon who the Senate leader will be, but he's already made it clear that he wants people to respect his mandate and to give him the power to make the appointments that he needs to do going on. So it's going to be a very different style, very different. And I know that I've seen some people on X talk about, is this person qualified, this person not qualified? As someone who works in the administration, in the industry, when I moved into the administration, that was a little different than I had done before. Most of your work is managing people. Most of your work is ensuring that you are following the leadership that you're given from the administration and making sure that all the experts that work in your team, that work in your department, have the tools necessary to succeed. And I joked around, I was the head of communications, and I had hundreds, if not thousands of people working for me. And I joked around like, I don't do hardly any communications. My job is to manage all of these different people to make sure that they could do their job.
Yep.
So what you need is clear leadership, good communicators, and people that have the ear and the respect of Trump to get things done.
So let me ask you a little tighter. Does the fact that he won with a different coalition impact what I'm hearing you say is it makes him stronger going into the first 100 days?
I think
Similar to Rob?
I think that a lot of people are calling this the unity coalition.
Yeah.
You have different people who have, you have Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy with this new department of like government efficiency, which are going to be an outside government organization influencing government. That's new and it's interesting, and I'm looking forward to like, what does that mean?
Right.
Because I will say again, in my past role, The deep state is real. People would come to me very clearly. They told me in my face when I was in government, it's like, you'll be here for a little bit, I will be here longer. And
They say that to Democrats too, so I'm not sure it's a deep state, but
what I'm saying is there are people in government roles who, for whatever reason, feel very, no, normally it's understandable, feel very passionate about their job and they feel that they have a certain expertise. And whatever the political person is, they look a lot of times at the political appointees with a little disdain because they think like, you don't know what you're doing.
right,
I know
you're a
what I'm doing.
part-timer coming in.
Yes.
Yeah,
So, but what I'm saying is that is real. And I think that he's going to address that. But as far as the Unity Coalition, you're going to, again, new people coming in. He's promised to have a libertarian on the in the cabinet. He's promised to have all this different kind of people. I'm looking forward to like, what is Tulsi Gabbard's role? What is Kennedy's role? What are all these different people's role? We've seen a lot of those announcements, but we haven't seen everything. But I assume that most of his cabinet will be announced in the next 2 weeks.
just want to flag one thing Bettina pointed out in case you don't know. When she talked about the Senate elections are occurring as we speak, they're voting right now for Republican Senate leadership in their caucus meeting this morning. So that'll help flesh out what his governing body and coalition looks like. Joe.
Yeah, well, you told me to be quick, so I'll be.
Sure, Stephen.
We've talked a lot in these panels about the different demographic profiles of the voters and who voted where and who supported what, men, women, education, urban, rural. And we don't have a lot of research coming out of the election about what exactly people believed they were voting for. Now, let me tell you, people voted for Donald Trump. They voted for change, and they're going to get it. America's going to get change, for better or worse, it's coming. I think some of it actually, and I'm a hardcore Democrat, I think some of it actually pretty good. I mean, we have this arteriosclerosis in our government that needs to be shaken up. And I'm not going to agree with all the shaking, but I do believe it needs to happen. So I'm with you, Bettina. But the little bit of research we have indicates that there are two broad types of Trump voter. There are the hardcore MAGA voters, and there are people who just won't change. They don't like the economy. They, whatever. So they listen to what Trump said on the stump about retribution and about, all the sort of what as a Democrat we would say were crazy things. And they're like, yeah, he's not really going to do that. And there are people who, they say that, and you see it in the research. You see it in the exit polling. So now he's not really going to do that. And then there are people in the MAGA universe who say, by God, he better do that. So I think there is a dichotomy in Trump voters, and how that plays out over the first 100 days, the next 100 days, we don't really know yet. And it's, the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Elise?
I guess watching these new appointments to the cabinet, it does strike me as a different tack from his first administration and the types of big hires he made at the beginning of his administration. Previously, someone like Rex Tillerson, the CEO of Exxon, he respected his business acumen. He didn't really know him. He didn't know what he was doing. This go around, he chooses Marco Rubio. He also chose Pete Hegseth, who was an Iraq war activist, a pro-war activist for Department of Defense. I think that's more telling than that he is a Fox News host now, because that's something that Trump has constantly said. He is against the very foreign policy that both Rubio and Hegseth
Represent.
Yes. So it's less about ideology still, but it's about who he can bend to his will. And you look at what he did to Marco during the primary, and Marco has gone from being incredibly hawkish to just half-heartedly echoing the new Republican talking points on foreign policy. So as we see these appointees get into position, I think that's what Trump is realizing more than ideology. He wants people who are actually going to execute what he wants.
It's interesting when you study the history of transitions, and one of the great lessons we're learning in the era of Trump is studying history doesn't really project or predict the future. But history does set expectations right? So then you have an administration who may break expectations or may meet them. And that happens on both sides of the aisle. You know, the Clinton Gore transition of 93, historians, Rob, you back me up on this, would tell you it was one of the it was a disastrous transition window, which led to a really challenging first 100 days, right? President Clinton spent a lot more time getting his cabinet named versus getting his senior staff named, which leads right to what Bettina said, which was he's got his team in place. They're helping him make these final decisions and getting them through. And so take a minute and just share an item from a first 100 days that you saw as a great success or a great disaster that you can recall.
A great disaster was the Biden administration not pushing Congress to have hearings immediately on January 6th that changed the course of history. And you look at how we remember what happened the day that there was an insurgency at our Capitol, and historical memory has just been completely tossed out the window. And there are so many different narratives of what actually happened. And they didn't want to just slow down their agenda.
And therefore,
Yes.
yeah, this is a cold question to the panel, by the way. So impressive that you popped that right. Joe, what about you?
Yeah, it is a cold question. And you know, I do politics. I don't do government, so transition is not my thing. But I would agree. I would definitely agree with that. And I thought that the fact that in the first Trump administration, nobody really showed up in the agencies. And this is according to friends of mine who worked at various agencies. Nobody showed up until he was president. And all of a sudden, there they were. And there were empty offices, and there was not a great deal. Now, you may have a different experience, but for the folks who I know, people just showed up. And nobody in the agencies knew who they were. And so there was a period of a couple of months there when there was a lot of confusion among the Schedule C and permanent employees. Schedule C are political appointees.
Yeah, part of that, in fairness to the Trump team last time, and Bettina can probably flesh out, is they didn't expect to win. So they weren't very
That's
deep
true.
into transition
true.
planning. The calendar days matter. What you do between election day and inaugural day, what this is driving toward, has tremendous impact on the first 100 days.
And they also fired their director of transition.
Yes.
Chris Christie
Right.
had
Yeah.
a detailed plan.
Bettina?
I want to highlight something you said in the beginning about, and just reiterate right now, these last few days before the administration and the next 100, the first 100 days are very different, but are very connected, right?
Yes.
And an experience means something, and they're just going to be very different. Yes, like the first administration for Trump, it was a little chaotic. I remember on lots of phone calls, hey, do you want to recommend this person? How about this person? Like it was a little crazy, and still doing that at inauguration, calling people on, well, how about this person for this job? That is not going to happen this time around. And I'm an extreme optimist in many kind of ways. And I really think that I'm really impressed on what he is doing now and the team doing now. And maybe because I'm biased for Susie Wiles, my former boss, who I think is just one of the best people I have ever worked for. Smart, brilliant, but tough. And I think that's the kind of person that you need as chief of staff. But they're shaping up their White House staff, which is really important.
Mm-hmm.
They're
An important lesson from the Clinton.
and they're putting people at the top, and then those that know about transition, you also have these beach teams, and you have each agency
Landing,
will have
right?
a landing team or a beach team that will be in charge of it. But having an administrator or your secretary already appointed, so there's more of a coordination, will be essential for a smooth government. So there is more consideration, because instead of them working independently of like, I'm going to staff people because I need people on the day one, having your cabinet person, so those people work together, it's going to be really important to have a strong government.
Can I follow up with you on this for just a second and talk a little bit about what you think the fact that the Trump team has not yet signed the GSA memorandums of agreement is delaying the landing teams from getting there? Or do you think they're close to coming up with a deal?
We'll sign it. I am confident that we'll sign it. They're just the lawyers have been negotiating for a while. If no one has learned something, Trump likes to negotiate. So They're negotiating, and when it's ready, but I am confident it will be signed, and I'm confident it will happen. Their lawyers are very close and they're gonna get signed.
Yeah, I was gonna walk through it for everybody real quick. Yeah, so, so for the transition, because what you're hearing on the panel is these next, are we 68 days? I don't know how many days we have
I
left.
don't know, too close.
Between now and the inaugural, a whole series of steps have to be taken to transition the government, right? And that has dramatic impact, what you're hearing across the board on the first 100 days. And we're gonna go to Congress in just a second and talk about that. GSA is the General Services Administration. They literally own the real estate. They hold the keys to the office buildings. They own the keys to getting the security clearances kicked in. There are a certain set of rules in government that are legislatively and regulatory organized around how people get cleared for security, how information is shared. It would be important for the president-elect to be getting the regular briefings on the Israel-Gaza conflict right now, right? So that the minute they step in, they know what was happening that day. And there are also rules that come with if you're going to, and the government pays for the office space and you can put staff on salary. And with that comes some other rules that you have to disclose certain information and all sorts of things. There's a terrific article, it's in the Post or the New York Times
I
today.
believe it's in the Times.
You might
today.
Google where there is some speculation about why they haven't done that yet. It looks back at the 2016. There are arguments that I think it's not shocking to anybody that President-elect Trump and his team don't want to really capitulate to rules about transparency and reporting requirements. Democrats don't like it either, but they'll do it. And so you might find some speculation around the arguments of why he and his team have not yet agreed with that. And so, in fact, I might turn to Rob a little bit. Have you followed some of that debate going on?
Well, maybe one other point, Kiki, just to go back. I mean, I think one helpful way of thinking about the transition is we used to talk about honeymoons, right? And the first 100 days, you'd have a honeymoon, and the idea was that you came in as president and you campaigned on certain things, and Congress was kind of eager to kind of go along and see how it goes, and you kind of got your way. I don't know that makes any sense to talk about transitions like that anymore. I'm not sure it's happened since. I don't think it happened with Clinton. I'm not sure we've had one since. And partly that's because of a point that was made nicely yesterday, that there tends to be this kind of overreach. And the Clinton transition was a great example of this. You know, their first 100 days, you know, they come out of the gate having run a kind of centrist new Democrat campaign, and they lead with gays in the military and healthcare, right? Another of my favorites is the second Bush administration in 2004, right? There was a big Republican victory, and Karl Rove had this theory at the time that this was going to be one of these transformative, realigning elections on the model of the 1896 election with McKinley that ushered in this long period of Republican dominance. And so they thought this was the time to pounce. And the thing they chose to pounce on was partial privatization of Social Security, right? Maybe Bush won, maybe he had a mandate, but it wasn't a mandate for that. It was a disaster, and I'm not sure Bush ever fully recovered from that. So
Well, immigration reform too. I was in the second
immigration
Bush
reform
White House.
too, right. And I think one lesson you take away from this is that it's really easy to overread your mandate. And, you know, in the case of Clinton, managed to recover. I'm not sure George W. Bush ever did.
Well, Elise, this is a good segue to you to ask about, I mean, this concept of a honeymoon, right? You've both designed and been the architect around some of the biggest speeches going in. You've studied the numbers. Is there a window for a honeymoon of this coalition for President Trump, or do his own demand and expect a great deal very quickly? He has set expectations by his rhetoric from his pulpit, right? And what does that look like in the first 100 days?
There's a honeymoon that presidents of
All
both
media?
parties get. I think presidents of
Does
both
Trump get it
parties
from the mainstream?
Sorry. It's going to be nicer. Trust me, it's going to be nicer than it will be. The first 100 days will be
Okay,
better
so
than it will
relative to
be.
the long
You know,
haul.
Relative, you look at the beginning of the Trump term, the Trump last time, relative speaking, he did get that initial, oh, maybe it's all a joke. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And
Yeah.
then he had his American Carnage speech and it kind of started evaporating. Any media goodwill towards him. But I think that he is under extreme pressure. He's got so many executive orders to do on day one that he has to just sign, get out of the gate. A lot of them that Biden repealed his previous executive orders. He's
And
gonna
these are
reinstate
traditional
them.
campaign promises. He's gonna
Campaign
write the
promises,
traditional
which,
concept.
one of them, pardon January 6 rioters. Another, the Schedule F initiative that Bettina mentioned, where civil servants can be fired at will. And so change the way that government functions. And then, shutting down the border on day one with Mexico. So he's got those are pretty huge campaign promises that if he is going to attempt by executive order on day one, he's moving in and going to make, I don't see how he cannot do those.
I can always tell when Joe McLean has something to say. Joe.
Well, no, I think we can watch early, just like Elise said, we can watch early. And we've already seen some of it and we've talked about that. But as I was thinking about this, there are like 4 broad areas where we're going to know pretty quick how his administration is going to go. And I sort of divided them up into social and cultural, and that includes immigration. Okay, that includes what we're going to do about immigration in this country, and everybody agrees we have a problem. We have a problem at the border. It needs to be fixed. It also includes, affirmative action and DEI. What's he going to do? Where are we going with the social, family values, Christian nationalism, governance, and bureaucracy and democracy? Is he really going to pardon all those people who pled guilty to felonies on January 6th? Is he going to fulfill his pledge of retribution against his enemies? This is something that's really never been done in American politics. Is he going to do that? We don't know. What's he going to do with the Justice Department? We don't know who's going to be Attorney General yet, or we know who runs the FBI, but he may try to push him out. What's he going to do on the economy? He's promised to do things on health care, and he's promised to reduce taxes and raise tariffs. Is he going to actually do that? Most economists say that's a really bad idea, but he thinks it's a great idea. So is he going to do it? And the other is global leadership. And we're going to know pretty quickly whether he's going to try and maintain the post-World War II global legal structure that we've all benefited from for the last 80 years, or if he's going to either try to leave NATO or not support NATO. What's he going to do about what's going on in the Middle East? Where is he going to be on Israel? I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what's going to happen in Israel. And we need to be really careful to look at that. And what's he going to do about Ukraine and Putin? Are we going to solve the war in Ukraine by giving Putin everything he wants or not? How's that going to go? We're going to know those things. We're going to know those outlines pretty quickly. And part of his base, some of his voters are going to say, yeah. And some of his voters are going to say, yeah, I didn't know he really meant it. So that's going to be interesting also. So again, I go back to the Chinese curse. We're in for some really exciting months.
Bettina, I want to go back to something you said, which kind of plays off of where Joe went. And because of your history in space and in the administration and your knowledge and experience in the national security realm, what does the first 100 days look like on foreign policy? And because to your point, he sent a message with who he appointed first in the last week.
And I would say, not surprising, I'm not completely in agreement with some of the things that have been said. That being said, there's something I saw on social, and I appreciate it. Like, Trump hasn't been elected president. Hasn't become president yet, but the stock market is record high. Migrant caravans at the border are stopping because
Doesn't Biden have credit for it since he's president?
Definitely not. I would say a lot of people, a lot of migrants and people from around the world have gone to the southern border because they knew that during the Biden administration, they would be more open. And I think the numbers speak for themselves. During Trump, we had around 3 billion encounters. Over the Biden administration, we've had, if I'm being generous, it's like 7 to 10 million encounters. So that is clear numbers. Hamas has called for the end of the war. Bitcoin is record high. Putin is talking about how we can negotiate the war. They had a call with Zelensky. I can go over
with Elon Musk.
And with Elon Musk, who has been supportive. So there's a lot of good things that are happening, and he's going to be saying, as he ran with a certain mandate, improve the economy. It is reduce taxes, end inflation, figure that out. And he's going to put all his efforts to try to have, one of the biggest thing that connected almost every group that voted for him was the economy.
So he leads with the economy
I
in the
think
first
the
100
economy
days.
and immigration. Immigration is going to be a huge thing on how do you deal with those numbers because it's unsustainable. And you even have the mayor of New York who's also saying, hey, I'm going to end these vouchers because it is hurting my city and I can't deal with what was going on. So you're going to see a change in that. You're also going to see changes in all the other different things, but with not getting to any wars. He is very proud, and a lot of the people that voted for him were, a big part was he's the only president not getting us into another war, and he does not want another world war. I grew up in a anti-communist house, so Putin and Russia and all that kind of stuff, like not a big fan. But Ukraine right now it is a stalemate. It is this constant stalemate, and we need something to figure it out. And if Trump can figure that out and hope and protect Ukraine and but stop the billions of dollars of US dollars going to that makes the entire
So
world
does he do the
safer.
same for Israel?
I hope so. Hamas is already saying they want to end the war. I'm also a big supporter of Israel. So I'm hoping that it also comes to an end. No one wants deaths. No
But
one wants.
you believe he tries to be very, I'm interviewing you because I'm curious. Do you believe he, in that first 100 days, he goes very
I
heavy
think he's
on
gonna try
Israel and
very hard.
Ukraine?
If during his administration, he passed the Abraham Accords, and it's probably the safest, peaceful time that we've had in the Middle East. And I hope that we can figure out how to continue those kind of dialogues to respect people as much as possible and not have any more deaths and to have peace in the world.
And does he do that by cutting off funding?
I'm not an expert on all that stuff.
Got it.
Right? So
Fair.
I'm not going to say it in the way that probably others would, but I know that this is what he has said, and I think everyone is hoping it. I'm a mom of 2 little boys, and the last thing I want them to go is to go into war.
Oh, I'm the mom of a boy who's eligible right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
So, but that was a lot of people across America who that was a top issue for them.
Elise,
In terms of foreign policy, I would also say the first 100 days, watch how Trump handles the situation, Israel and Iran.
yeah,
Because Trump was personally threatened and targeted by Iran
Right.
during the
Mhm.
campaign, and you're
Yes.
telling me that he's
Yes.
going to forget that, and he's going
Absolutely.
to let that slide.
Yeah.
So I would watch that space pretty closely. But I think it's an incredibly dangerous time in the region right now. You've got Lebanon imploding, you've got Israel and what's going on in Gaza. You've got, what Biden's horrible mismanagement of Afghanistan. And granted, I think Biden's foreign policy has been horrible.
Horrible.
So it's, also what Trump is to some extent inheriting, because it's been such a managed by bureaucrats essentially. And now it's going to be a completely different stamp of what Trump wants and personal diplomacy, personal negotiation, and really moving away from the interagency system that is so dominating
right.
Biden's foreign policy, and in my opinion, has led to complete disaster.
So let me give some framing as I go to Rob with the next question. So we've heard the panel say, and I think Bettina was really articulate the way she laid out very clearly for us, like right out of the campaign. He's made significant, important promises on the economy that his voters came to him with, and he said, I'm going to be there for you on immigration, 2 wars that are defined as wars, more conflicts that Elise just laid out. And mind you, it's not until the 3rd week of January he takes office, right? So the first 100 days is coming fast, right? And all of a sudden it becomes very compressed. That's a lot to get done. A lot of the things Elise raised can be done by executive order. A lot require legislative support and legislative action. So let's turn to the fact that you're going to, by the time we're all at happy hour, maybe, have a new Senate leader, right? And what does all of that mean for the first 100 days, the congressional leaders?
Well, I kind of, one of my opening points was that it probably matters a lot less because the party is clearly the party of Trump now. And I
But
think
what do those margins look like that they have to marshal up on some of these deals?
Yeah, in terms of the margins, those are what they are. But whether it's John Thune or John Cornyn or Scott, I don't think that matters all that much. I think you can kind of parse it out and say, well, like Thune would be sort of the more traditional choice. And I suppose Scott would be the most Trumpy of the bunch. But as a practical matter, I just don't know that it matters much, right? It's a totally different world, as I said at the beginning, from 8 years ago, when you did have these hubs within the Republican Senate and House caucuses that were skeptical, had some members who were outright hostile to Trump. That just doesn't exist. Those people are all gone, or they have been persuaded that to survive in the current Republican Party, you have to be on board with Trump, and especially at the beginning, right? It'd be one thing if things go poorly, and 2 years from now, maybe we're in a different place. But I don't see how anyone in a Republican Senate or a Republican House, with just very, very few exceptions, is in any position whatsoever to do anything except go along with what Trump wants.
Elise, as a former White House staffer, are there flags that you would raise for the incoming White House team about what it means to have all three branches of government? And this one feels different to
You
you
can really blow it really quickly
in the first 100
in the
days.
first 100 days.
How so?
You can overstep in terms of kind of what voters, yes, they voted for him, but did they vote for the whole package? Did they vote for the retribution? Are they going to be reminded? So many news platforms deplatformed Trump, which I think is really stupid because voters couldn't hear from him directly. And they're going to be hearing from him directly every single day. And they're going to be getting the part of Trump that they don't like. They aren't going to be getting the Trump of their memories with a stronger economy and decisive, what they remember fondly as a more decisive path, more decisive leadership. They're going to get the Trump warts and all, and the tweeting. And I think that he has a really quick window to actually execute, but not overstep.
Yeah, I keep hearing Bettina in my ear talking about Susie Wiles and her leadership. And so I feel like I've reset my expectation about what I think it's going to feel like going in this time. But Bettina, you've dealt a lot with government relations, what it means to actually get a piece of legislation through as well. Even any dangers to having all three?
That's great.
Yeah. You'd rather have that than none.
Who doesn't want to be able to have like as much opportunities, as many
Right.
tools as possible to get stuff done, right? Like, and this is different. We've talked about three things, but he has this unity coalition of people, and there's lots of different reasons that people voted for him. Some people voted because they wanted global peace. They were anti-censorship. They wanted to eliminate chronic disease because of what Kennedy talks about. They wanted to end monopolies. Like, there's all these different factors that come into a coalition. They have those key things, but he's been very honest with what he is going to do. And I know there's a lot of people in this room and others who did not vote for him, clearly. I think a lot of it was some language thinking the worst of him. And the thing I would ask everyone is, write a list of the things that you think is going to happen, the worst things that are going to happen, and compare them. I don't think that the press is going to give them or has ever given him any kind of grace, the legacy media. And I would tell you to look up the full speech. I think one of those on the conservative side, the Republican side, sometimes felt that things were taken out of context. And I understand Trump is not perfect. He's very different. He is not this statesman that says everything like perfectly. But I would ask you, look for the full speech, look for the full context, understand everything that's going on, because there's going to be a lot of people who have lots of different points of views. They're going to try to shape that opinion of people. And I think it's important to try to make judgment calls for yourself. And I do agree that taking him off and taking him off these platforms only fueled those on the right, making them feel that there is this censorship and there is this like stopping of information. And I think they're going to be even more excited to try to show their side of the story.
Let me run one last question down the panel. Joe, you want to comment on that?
Well, you were talking
Okay.
about Congress. It's important to understand what's going to happen in Congress and kind of how that works over the next few weeks leading into the administration. The House, all money bills, all the spending bills originate in the House of Representatives. And we've got to pass continuing resolutions to keep the government functioning. We've got to pass, I think it's ag, and what's the other bill that's got to come through between now and the end of the year.
Mhm.
And there's a move among House Republicans to delay the big spending decisions until after January 20th. Now, look, the House of Representatives, the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives is a hot mess, which regularly devolves into a dumpster fire. So we don't know exactly how that, well, just, it's the history. I really don't mean to denigrate. I'm sorry. I apologize. But we don't know what's going to happen there. We don't know how that's going to work out. And in the Senate, any of those big spending bills, when they reach the Senate, due to the budgetary process, have to be subject to what's called budget reconciliation. I'm not going to go into all that, but it takes more than a simple majority to pass that. So you can own both houses of Congress and not get budget bills through. Okay. Nobody knows how that's going to work out. And there will be opposition in the Republican Party to elements of any spending bill. So not all the Republicans may vote with the Republican bill. I mean, that's what's happened historically over the last 2 years anyway, is that the Republicans in the House have had to go get Democratic votes in order to keep the government functioning.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump has said on multiple occasions, shut it down, just shut the government down. So when we get to January 20th and he's the president, I mean, maybe he will, maybe he won't. Personally, I think it's a mistake to do that, but he may feel that there's an advantage to it. We just don't know the answer to that. So watch what happens in Congress, because it's going to really matter for his first 100 days.
I want to ask one last question, and then we'll go to questions from you all. And that is the big outside personalities, right? So he's named to the commission on government efficiency. We talked about at the beginning of the panel with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, right? Robert F. Kennedy Jr. kind of looms out there. What kind of role? There's some other personalities. What role do these folks get to play in the first 100 days? And is that a positive, a negative, gosh, a wait and see, maybe? Because we've never seen any of these people in government or in the orbit of government. Any thoughts? Elise, why don't you go first?
I really wonder how long the Elon bromance can last.
Yeah.
Just because they're both cults of personality.
Yeah.
And at what point does Elon overstep and Trump remind?
Well, there was
him
already
he's not
coverage
at all?
this
There's already
morning.
in the post today
Yes.
about that. Yeah.
Exactly. So I wonder about that. I think putting anyone to work with Vivek is really difficult. And so a project that I actually herald, and I would love to see government be more efficient, that seems a little bit doomed to have those two co-heads at the top of it. RFK, what's he really, another cult of personality. I don't think he will be able to move the levers that quickly within the first 100 days. As we all know, the FDA is notoriously slow, and it just to revamp that is going to take far more than what the power that he's going to have at his hands. I'm really curious about these cabinet nominees, and it seems like most of them will get confirmed, but I do wonder if he goes too extreme in certain areas, if he's going to have a Bernard Kerik situation on his hands. That was a failed Bush appointee for Homeland Security back in 2004 that I remember working on those remarks and opening up his biography, and the first page was all F-bombs, and we were like, oh, okay, this is going to be interesting. So yeah, so we'll see, but it's new rules, and especially Trump operates under rules that no politician gets to operate under.
Honest to goodness, if you've never ever been part of a cabinet ushering team, getting a cabinet nomination through, it's like the Disneyland of politics. You got to do one in your lifetime, win or lose. It's a unique experience. Rob, the big personalities.
I don't know.
That there would
It's
be big
new.
personalities with him, right?
Right. It's new. I kind of have my doubts about Kennedy being able to last. I just don't know that the American public is quite there on that one, and I'm not sure that Trump is going to want to put up with the blowback on it. On appointments in general, one thing I'd note is that it's often been the case historically that opponents of whoever the new president is will go after one person, and often they are successful in bringing down one
person.
You can often get one, right? And so far, this nominee for Secretary of Defense would seem like maybe
in the 12 hours since
one
being outed, yeah.
But yeah, he's a little bit of a bigger step out there than some of these more establishment figures, Elise Stefanik and Marco Rubio.
Yeah. Bettina?
Yeah, all of us are just trying to pretend that we have crystal balls, trying to tell the
Fair.
future, right? Like, we don't know. It's a lot easier to talk about what happened than what's going to happen, especially when you have new figures. Mind you, I'm biased. I've had the pleasure of working with Elon Musk. I've met him many times. He's one of the smartest human beings I
That's
have ever
great that
met.
we hear that from you. Yeah.
Very different, right? But like the guy taught himself how to be a rocket scientist. Like, who does that? So like, he's a very interesting person, and he's a problem solver. He's very demanding because he has a vision. If you haven't noticed, like, he picks something, he focuses on it, he gets it done. But I think Trump surrounds himself with those kind of people. He wants things done because, again, I've been in the corporate world for a few years now, and that's how how they all are. Like, they want action, they want different points of view, but when they make a decision, they get it done. And I'm looking forward to a shakeup. And to your point earlier, the American public want authentic leaders. They want change. They want something that they haven't seen before, because they're tired of a government that they feel is not in touch with their views. So I can't tell you everything that will happen in the future, but I think the American public are open to something different.
Joe?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to agree with Bettina on this exactly. I'm not entirely. Thank you. But yes, the American people do want change, because for the last 25 or 30 years, the government has not worked for them in their eyes, right? They feel like they can't get ahead. And, I worked for Barack Obama, and President Obama said, American people don't really expect a lot from government. They would like to have a decent job with some security for the future. They would like to be able to retire with some dignity. They would like to have their kids to have a decent education. And if they get sick, they don't want to get broke. They don't want to go broke and lose their home. That's about it. That's really kind of what the American people expect from government, and they're not getting it now. Now, on my side of the aisle, we say it's the Republicans' fault. And the Republicans will say, well, it's you Democrats, so we're all fighting each other. And the American people look at this, and you understand, from where you sit, this is like a morality play. You're watching a movie, and you're watching how the participants, how the protagonists interact with each other. And, we're all invested in this. So we think we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. But the American people, the American voters, don't look at it that way. They look at it like, here are all these people, let's hear what they have to say. And oh, by the way, who's the good guy? So, having said that,
Quickly.
it is difficult. It is difficult to change the government. And I think the American people are all for it. Heck, I'm all for it. I'm all for trying. But who remembers regov? Who remembers reinventing government?
It was re-go, not re-gov. Let me just clarify.
So
They're too young to know about re-go.
things, just keep this in mind when you think about changing things. Things are the way they are for a reason. Offices exist the way they exist for a reason. They were created to meet a need. One of the problems with government is, once you create a program, it's almost impossible to get rid of it, because when you start talking about getting rid of it, somebody's ox gets gored, right? But things are the way they are because they were created that way to meet a need.
Great. Thank you.
So it's hard to change.
You can do that when it's your husband. All right, let's go to questions. Tom's got the mic. He has the power. Remind us who you are and where you're from.
Afternoon, my name is Robert. I'm a first-year social policy master's student here, studying on a Marshall Scholarship. I wanted to talk about something that came up yesterday, but was absent so far, which was Project 2025, because I think that document is very much a blueprint for the transition and for the first 100 days. I also think that it's one that Trump has tried to distance himself from, but that a lot of members of his cabinet might be more ideologically committed to. So I was wondering to what extent you think he's going to adhere to Project 2025, and also whether you foresee any rifts within the executive branch should he deviate from it too far.
I have a little insight on that. It is genuinely disturbing the extent to which the blowback, from the Trump campaign. I'm not sorry, I'm being really not articulate right now. Basically,
I understand what you're saying.
Chris LaCivita hates Project 2025. just tactically as a campaign, you don't want outsiders writing up a plan and saying, you're doing this and acting like
You
they're.
talked about super PACs having
Yes.
influence. This had a
They-
bigger influence than any outside
They
super PAC.
it personally gets under the Trump campaign and the Trump camp's skin. So really, it was just the dumbest thing that any Republican could ever do for a campaign they supported, because they gave Democrats perfect talking points.
Yeah.
And so, yes, they might have dramatic reshaping of government. Some of the ideas they might agree with, but they are not going to hew to it.
And I would just
Although
add,
you'll see outcomes that look similar because there's some shared
Yes.
Well,
agenda.
I just want to reinforce, like, anyone who's been in DC for more than a hot second knows that there's a zillion think tanks. And every think tank wants to be relevant. And every think tank creates policy papers and white papers to show this is what you should be doing. This is what the government should be doing. So what Project 2025 is no different than anything that's happened for the entire course of history of a think tank putting out policy ideas. And it's a massive document. It's like 1,000
It is.
pages.
It's crazy.
So it's everything. It has, so I would, again, there might be some things in there because some of them are conservative principles, but any campaign, especially Trump, doesn't want anyone telling him what he's going to do unless it's Trump.
You know, I will tell you that an example of where you can have great influence is in the example of the 92 campaign for Bill Clinton. He took over the party and he took over a new way of thinking, right? Putting people first, and there was an agenda. And there were a group of people who for years, meaning 3 or 4, had worked with him to develop that policy agenda. And so during transition, while those people didn't necessarily take a formal position on transition, one person was put there on purpose. They're private memos from the 2 or 3 thinkers that go directly to the president. And that's how you ensure the adherence to an agenda, which is what really fueled your run. I think I'm going to take Bettina's challenge to us and say, here's what he said. Here's what Project 25 said. I'm going to start looking where it meets up and we'll see what happens with it, right?
Hi, thanks everybody for being here. Broderick McDonald, I'm a DPhil in Politics and International Relations. I just had a question for Bettina about the senior, I guess, White House staff, campaign staff. So a lot of the focus so far has been on, these outsiders, Musk and Vivek and so forth. What about, can you give us any insight into somebody like Susie Wiles? I feel like
you
she's
can.
very poorly understood. Like, what motivates her? What are her personal priorities? Maybe some of the other people around. I know Steve Miller is now Deputy Chief of Staff. Even in the Victory Night speech, Susie Wiles, declined to say anything.
It's Susie, like, she's not.
Yeah.
There's different types of people, chief of staff. There's people that like being on TV, and they're going to do the Sunday shows. They're going to be out there talking about the president's principles. That is not Susie. Susie is.
She's got 4 deputies now, which is also
Yeah.
unusual.
Yeah, we've publicly heard of a few of them, and I just think that Susie's dad. She's the daughter of a famous football player. She herself has 2 daughters. She's a loving mother, but she's also a really hard worker, and she just likes getting stuff done. My time working with her, that she really respected the team. She empowered people. She did not micromanage. She really got stuff done. She works well with others. I'm highly optimistic about it. I think in general, what you're gonna see from the Trump White House is a lot of people that have been with him for a long time, especially now, the first time. As we all know, administrations are weird. You have the first round, and then 2 years into it, it has like a round
It's a
2.
fatigue factor too.
Yeah,
that's
it's
just like-
exhausting, right? Like, I know people that worked in the White House, and they'd be in the office at 7 a.m. and they wouldn't get home till 10 p.m.
Another husband in the
My
room.
another one
Yeah.
husband, like my husband, he worked for Vice President Pence, and that was challenging because we had just had our second kid, and I had a little bit of FOMO, right? One of my mentors, Mercy Schlapp, was in the White House and trying to convince me. She's like, "I have 5 kids. You can do it with 2." I'm like, "I don't know how you do it," but it is an exhausting thing, and like with any job, the most important thing is teamwork and having a team that you can trust and work well with to get stuff done. And I think that the first Trump White House was unfortunately known for a lot of gossiping, for a lot of people talking to the media and getting stuff done. I don't expect this in this White House. It's a really tight team.
Hi. Hello. Hi, my name's Lucy. I am wondering, Trump has talked about eliminating the Department of Education and turning that back to the states. And you were talking about how positions are created for a reason. So I'm wondering, is that possible? And if so, what are the implications for that and for the rest of the administration and the restructuring there? This is
Anybody want to
know.
take that before I call on somebody?
You'll have to block grant it. You'll have to take a page out of Ronald Reagan and block grant it because,
What is block grant, Joe?
okay, under Reagan,
Shortly. Just saying.
sometimes it's good to just explain things, and that might take a minute. No, under Reagan, when Reagan began to devolve certain functions of the federal government to the states, what they did is instead of the federal government doing a thing and paying for it, they gave the money to the state and allowed the state to spend the money as they saw fit. You think about Medicaid, there's a bunch of stuff like that. There are education programs that are block granted already. So if you're going to eliminate the Department of Education, and I mean, I've heard the reasons for doing it. Some of them make sense. There are lots of reasons not to, but that money will still have to flow to the states, right? Because one of the truths about our government is our state governments really only do three things. They educate, medicate, and incarcerate. That's it. Everything else the state government does, whether it's the state troopers or the state,
I'm gonna steal that.
I know, I'm writing that down.
well, that's not mine. That's Tom Vilsack's. I'll give Tom Vilsack credit for that. Everything else the states do, they build roads and they build water systems and all that. It's like spit in the ocean. The real money is in those three places. So if you do eliminate the Department of Education, all that money the Department of Education spends in the states, and remember, there are a lot of red states out there that get a lot of money from the Department of Education. It has to be block granted. So if they do eliminate the department, they can't take the money away. Because if you start taking the money away, no United States senator is going to vote for that. And there are more senators from red states than there are from blue states.
Hey, Lucy, it's fair to say Lucy was one of my two wonderful dinner partners last night, and I know she's studying education, so she really cares about where this goes in the future and why, right? Rob, you have something to offer?
Just a couple of points. I'd say easier said than done. But you know, it's worth noting this is not something Trump just cooked up. This has been something that Republicans have
It's a
talked
long
about
time
for decades.
Yeah.
And it is
No child
it is-
left behind.
It is
today.
worth noting what Joe said. I mean, most of the action in education is at the state and local level, right? At the national level, it's really kind of a minor thing, but still that takes a lot of political will, right? Is that really where you want to push all your chips? But I think just yesterday or the day before, Trump did reiterate that he wants to do that, right? And so maybe he is serious about it.
Other questions? Two over here, please, sir, Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you. I'm Trevor, also a Texan.
Where,
studying MBA.
Trevor?
Houston.
Houston.
Nice.
I have people I love there.
Me too. Me too.
I thought that was a good answer. Right? San Antonio.
Okay, gotcha. I'm gonna argue myself. But so Bettina brought it up earlier about things that are already being moved since Trump has won, like the stock market and the announcements from different countries. I think I've heard about European politicians scrambling, getting together because they know what's coming after Trump. I would guess that bureaucrats are scrambling, getting together, knowing that there's a Department of Government Efficiency coming. What do you think realistically? I know this panel is about the first 100 days, but what do you think? And also a big campaign promise of Trump's was that he would end the Ukraine war before Inauguration Day. So what do you think realistically he can actually move before he steps into office? And how do you think that impacts how the first 100 days goes for him?
Anybody want to take a shot? I don't want to put everything on Bettina here, but. Right. I'll start with something on this.
Yeah,
end.
like,
On the foreign policy side, he can certainly have conversations with anyone he chooses in the whole wide world. He's a private
and he
citizen.
has, yeah.
So the concept that he could start, mind you, his calls already with other leaders have not been monitored or staffed by the State Department because he hasn't signed the GSA agreement, okay? So the reality is the State Department doesn't know what he's cooking up over here. But he can in fact be in negotiations. And everybody has to hope it works out at the end that he's actually, because he hasn't gotten support from the agencies that might be involved in supporting an agreement. So I think that's possible, don't you, Bettina and Elise? I mean, that's
Definitely. I mean, and also if he doesn't solve the war by Inauguration Day, it doesn't really matter to his base. He has made plenty of, he didn't build the wall, and it really ultimately did not. It was a promise that they knew that he wanted to do in theory, yet in practice couldn't entirely execute. And
so they were forgiving.
Exactly. So he has a very forgiving base. And I think that that is a promise that it's going to be, God bless him if he can do it. Great. But I would be shocked.
I think he's going to try. I'm like, I think he's going to try. I think every president, the strongest you are is in the beginning, and he's going to try. And as I mentioned, I'm an incredibly optimistic person. I think that he's going to try as much as he can. His team is going to try as much as he can, and we'll be here next year, and we'll talk about it.
Rob, do you think he can act on some of these things?
Well, to Elise's point, I think that points in a direction that maybe we haven't fully considered, and that is the assumption that Trump's supporters are demanding all these things. It's not the wall is a great example of this, right? The wall was not built, and Mexico did not pay for it, and yet I think for a lot of Trump supporters, they didn't necessarily care about that. It was the symbolism of it that mattered, and that he was kind of pushing things in the right direction, right? And the details, we don't work. And certainly when it comes to like the details of the budget process, right? People don't follow that. And so it's not obvious to me that the MAGA folks out there are going to be following any of this. And so long as Trump is getting up and doing his thing, putting on his show, antagonizing the right people, that goes a long way with his supporters.
It does. And also there's a gray area. And we're talking about him dealing with foreign leaders. The Logan Act makes it a felony for a private citizen to deal with foreign policy. Now, as president-elect, he has some latitude. And as president-elect, nobody's going to prosecute him for violating the Logan Act. But the fact is and God knows he runs through boundaries constantly. So who knows? But the fact is that's a gray area, and some caution is advised there in dealing with foreign leaders. You know, he can talk to them all he wants. Whether he cuts a deal or not, that's a different matter.
I think we have time for one quick last one. One quick, Mauricio. Okay.
Hi, Maurice, Default in Politics. Joe, you spoke about the difficulty of getting rid of things. A lot of the Biden legislation, key legislation, such as the IRA, CHIPS Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, have been proven quite popular. And a lot of Republican congressmen in key districts came out in support of keeping a lot of the tax credits. So what do you expect with kind of Biden's, what's going to happen with Biden's kind of legacy legislation?
Let me tell you a story. I just went in September and October. I got on my motorcycle and I rode 8,600 miles from Washington, D.C. to California and back.
By himself.
Yeah. And every 50 miles, there's road construction or they're building a water system. Or, I mean, America is alive with rebuilding our infrastructure all over the country. And I would stop, I'm kind of on purpose, I would stop at the flagman a lot of times when I even didn't have to. And I would talk to them about what they were doing there. Oh, this is great. We got all this business. I won't be home for a year because I've got business. We're working, my company's working. And I would ask them, you know, where'd that money come from? Well, the state and this, that, and the other. And I would tell them, I said, no, this came from the Infrastructure Act. And the Democrats passed this in Congress and Joe Biden signed it. Oh, no, that's not, no, the money, they don't know. They don't know where that money's coming from and they don't care. Okay, so and there's a lot of talk now among the Republican leadership about repealing big parts of the CHIPS and Science Act and the Infrastructure Act, and they may very well do that. And you know, there's some logic to that because it has driven some of the inflationary pressure that we've seen. I mean, it has, but we also didn't have a depression. You know, will you take a little inflation or do you want the Great Depression? That would be always my question. So the premise of your question, I think is correct. I'm not sure people know where that money's coming from, and I'm not sure they will notice when it's gone, except those projects won't happen. And they'll have forgotten about it by the time those projects stop. I hate to say that, but it's true.
Anything else our panel would like to add before I wrap us up? I want to thank this panel, and I'm going to leave you one thing to think about as you walk away. The one name that did not come up in all of this conversation was JD Vance. There
For
you
2
go.
days,
Thank
yeah.
you all.